To millions, he was the familiar face of Hee Haw, the jovial barber, the goofy doctor, the master of the joke. Archie Campbell was one of television's most beloved comedians who made a nation laugh with his down-to-earth style. But what if that laughter was a gilded cage? Behind the overalls and cornfields was a classically trained painter and a deeply spiritual musician who yearned to be recognized as a true artist. This is the tragic story of how Archie Campbell's overwhelming success as a comedian buried his true legacy, leaving the world with only the jokes and forgetting the artist within. To truly understand Archie Campbell, you have to travel to the place that forged him, Bulls Gap, Tennessee, where he was born in 1914. This small town, cradled in the ancient rolling hills of Appalachia, was a universe away from the slick production studios where he would one day make his name. In the early 20th century, life in this region was a study in contrasts. It was a place of breathtaking natural beauty and often profound economic hardship. It was a culture built on fierce independence, deep-seated faith, and an unshakable sense of community. Growing up in the shadow of the Great Depression, Archie was immersed in a culture where humor was not a luxury, but a necessity, a vital coping mechanism. The wit of Appalachia, largely born from Scots-Irish traditions, was unique. It wasn't bitter or cynical. It was earthy, observational, and frequently aimed at oneself. It was a humor that could find absurdity in a broken-down tractor, poetry in a neighbor's eccentricities, and a punchline at the bottom of a long day of hard labor. It was a way of acknowledging life's struggles without surrendering to them. This cultural bedrock, this ability to laugh at oneself and the world without a trace of malice, would become the signature of Archie's comedic voice. At the same time, a new kind of magic was crackling through the airwaves. Radio was no longer a novelty. It was the nation's hearth. From the powerful signal of WSM in Nashville, the Grand Ole Opry broadcast the sounds of string bands and gospel quartets into homes across the South. For a creative young man like Archie, this was a revelation. It was a bridge from his isolated mountain community to a vast, unseen audience. It was a new medium for the age-old traditions of storytelling and music that surrounded him. He saw a future in that crackling box, a path that would allow him to take the authentic voice of his home and share it with the world, never imagining how far that voice would one day carry him, or the price he would pay for its success. One of the most profound and telling details of Archie Campbell's life, a fact that stands in stark contrast to his public persona, is that his first artistic pursuit was not comedy or music, but visual art. He wasn't just a casual doodler. He was a dedicated and formally trained painter. After graduating from high school, he enrolled at Mars Hill College in North Carolina, a liberal arts institution where he pursued and earned a degree in art. Imagine that for a moment, the man who would spend decades in a comedic cornfield, dressed in overalls, began his creative journey studying composition, perspective, and color theory. This wasn't just a youthful phase. Painting remained his private, lifelong passion. It was his sanctuary. This fact is the master key to understanding the man's hidden depths. A painter's eye is one that sees the world in layers of nuanced texture and subtle shades. It's an eye for detail and a mind that understands structure. It is almost certain that this artistic training deeply informed his other talents. His comedic writing wasn't just a string of jokes. It had a painter's sense of composition, building a scene and delivering a punchline with perfect balance. His timing was not just instinctual. It had the deliberate, practiced rhythm of an artist making a brushstroke. The world would later see the simple, finished product, but it was built on a foundation of sophisticated artistic training. Despite his love for painting, The allure of the booming radio industry proved irresistible. In the late 1930s, he found his way to Knoxville and landed a job at radio station WNOX. This was a pivotal move. WNOX was no small-town operation. It was a regional powerhouse, and its live daily broadcast, the Midday Merry-Go-Round, was a true cradle of country music innovation. The show was a whirlwind of live music, comedy, and commercials, all performed under immense pressure in front of a studio audience. It was here that Archie Campbell truly learned his craft. He was the ultimate utility man, a jack of all trades who could write ad copy 1 minute, sing a gospel song the next, and then jump into a comedy sketch. The sheer volume of talent passing through the doors of WNOX during this era is staggering. Archie found himself working side by side with a quiet, preternaturally gifted young guitarist from nearby Luttrell, a teenager named Chet Atkins. Atkins would later recall Archie as a mentor figure, a seasoned professional who was always willing to help the younger performers. Archie also shared the stage with the Bales brothers, Carl Smith, and a pair of young boys with angelic harmonies who would later conquer the world as the Everly Brothers. This environment was his graduate school. He absorbed everything, learning from the best, and all the while developing his own unique, warm, and approachable on-air personality that made listeners feel like they were talking to an old friend. His burgeoning career was interrupted by World War II, during which he served in the U.S. Navy. Upon his return to Knoxville, he didn't just pick up where he left off. He became a local institution. As television began its inexorable rise, Archie was at the forefront. He created and hosted his own early morning TV show on WATE, Country Playhouse. For 10 years, from 1952 to 1962, he was a daily presence in the living rooms of East Tennessee. The show was a charming, homespun precursor to what he would later do on a national stage, a comfortable mix of live country music, light-hearted comedy, and community announcements. He wasn't just a face on the screen, he was a part of the fabric of the community. This local stardom brought him to the attention of RCA Records in Nashville, under the leadership of his old WNOX colleague, Chet Atkins. In 1956, Archie signed a recording contract, and the duality that would define his career came into sharp focus. He released a series of successful comedy albums. His narrative records, like The Cockfight and Trouble in the Amen Corner, were masterpieces of comedic storytelling, showcasing his perfect timing and his ability to create vivid characters with his voice alone. These records sold very well and solidified his reputation as a humorist, but he also poured his heart into recording sincere country and gospel music. He wrote and recorded songs that were tender, insightful, and deeply felt. Yet these records often struggled to find the same level of success. The public was already beginning to put him in a box. When they saw Archie Campbell's name on a record, they expected to laugh. This constant push and pull between the comedian the audience wanted and the serious artist he also was would be a source of quiet frustration for the rest of his life. His talent and dependability eventually earned him a coveted spot as a regular member of the Grand Ole Opry in Nashville. He was a respected figure, a veteran entertainer who had paid his dues and earned his place on the hallowed stage of the Ryman Auditorium. By the late 1960s, he had built a successful, stable career. He was well known in the country music world, but he was far from a national superstar. And then, a phone call from Hollywood changed everything. In 1969, Canadian television producers Frank Pepiat and John Aylesworth were riding high on the success of their groundbreaking comedy show, Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In. The show had revolutionized television comedy with its frantic pace, blackout sketches, and hip, counterculture vibe. Looking for their next hit, they landed on a brilliantly simple, if slightly audacious concept: a country version of Laugh-In. It would have the same rapid-fire pace but would trade the psychedelic colors and political satire for overalls, hay bales, and down-home humor. They would call it Hee Haw. They found their perfect hosts in two of country music's most charismatic and musically gifted stars: guitar virtuoso Roy Clark and the pioneer of the Bakersfield sound, Buck Owens. But for the show to work, it needed more than just great hosts and musical guests. It needed a comedic soul, a head writer and senior performer who understood the nuances of rural humor from the inside out. Their search led them to the veteran performer from Bulls Gap, Archie Campbell. Archie was not just hired as a cast member, he was a foundational architect of the show's comedic identity. He was brought on as the head writer, and his fingerprints were on nearly every recurring sketch that became a part of the American pop culture lexicon. Hee Haw premiered on CBS in the summer of 1969 and was an immediate out-of-the-box smash hit. The ratings were astronomical, shocking network executives who had underestimated the appeal of country culture. Archie himself became the star of several of the show's most beloved segments. In Archie's barbershop, he would don a barber's smock and trade stories with Roy Clark, the punchlines flying as fast as the imaginary clippings. The setting was pure genius, the small-town barbershop as the nerve center of community gossip and tall tales. Then there was PFFT, You Was Gone, a song segment where a line about a lost love would end with the entire cast blowing a raspberry. It was silly, juvenile, and utterly hilarious. But his undisputed masterpiece was his reinvention of the spoonerism, a form of wordplay where the initial sounds of two words are swapped. It's a difficult linguistic trick to pull off effectively, but Archie turned it into high art. Dressed in his overalls with a completely straight face, he would sit in the cornfield and read from a large storybook. He would recount classic fairy tales, but with a twist. Cinderella became Rinderkella, a poor gung Earl who lived with her two sickly usters. Instead of losing her glass slipper, she slopped her dripper. He told the story of Beeping Sleuty and the Pransome Hints. It was a breathtaking display of verbal acrobatics, delivered with the deadpan sincerity of a children's storyteller. The genius was in the performance. He made something incredibly difficult look utterly foolish and effortless. For millions of viewers, Archie Campbell was the funniest man in Cornfield County, a walking, talking embodiment of the show's good-natured, goofy spirit. The success of Hee Haw was a double-edged sword for Archie Campbell. On the one hand, it brought him a level of fame and financial security he had never dreamed of. He was a national celebrity, beloved by millions. He genuinely loved his work on the show, and deep friendships were forged among the cast, creating a loyal, family-like atmosphere that lasted for decades. He was especially close with Roy Clark, their on-screen chemistry a reflection of a real and deep affection. He took great pride in writing comedy that brought so much joy to so many people. Yet, underneath the surface, the private, artistic side of Archie was struggling. The louder the laughter from the television audience, the more difficult it became for his other talents to be heard. Friends and family knew a different Archie from the one on screen. In private, he was often quiet, thoughtful, and introspective. His greatest joy was not telling jokes on a soundstage, but retreating to his home art studio. There, surrounded by the smell of oil paints and turpentine, he would lose himself for hours, painting serene landscapes of the Tennessee mountains and countryside of his youth. This was not a hobby. It was a core part of his identity. The paintings were his way of communicating a different set of emotions, a sense of peace, beauty, and nostalgia that his comedic persona couldn't express. His son, Phil Campbell, later recalled how his father's art was his true refuge. It was the place where he could shed the skin of the TV comedian and reconnect with the introspective artist he had always been. This quiet, solitary passion stood in stark contrast to the boisterous public demands of his television fame. This internal conflict also played out in his musical career. He continued to write and record, and his most cherished compositions were often his most serious. He wrote "The Men in My Little Girl's Life," a song that beautifully captures the bittersweet emotions of a father watching his daughter grow from a little girl into a woman with a life of her own. It's a tender, deeply moving ballad, filled with genuine insight and emotion. But for an audience that knew him for the cockfight, it was a difficult sell. It was as if the world had collectively decided that Archie Campbell's job was to make them laugh, and any deviation from that role was met with confusion. He was a victim of his own success, pigeonholed by the very persona that had made him a star. The curse of the comedian is that the tears of a clown are often mistaken for another part of the act. This struggle for legitimacy was mirrored in the broader cultural perception of Hee Haw. While it dominated the ratings, particularly in what was then called flyover country, it was an object of scorn and ridicule among coastal media elites and television critics. They lambasted the show as a hillbilly minstrel show, an unsophisticated and cartoonish portrayal of rural life that was out of step with the times. The criticism stung, as it implied that the show and the people who made it lacked intelligence and artistic merit. This critical disdain culminated in a shocking move in 1971. In an effort to rebrand its image and appeal to a more youthful, urban, and sophisticated demographic, CBS executives enacted what is now famously known as the Rural Purge. In a single season, the network canceled its entire slate of highly rated rural-themed sitcoms. The Beverly Hillbillies, Green Acres, Mayberry RFD, and of course Hee Haw were all axed, despite their massive audiences. The message from the network was clear. The culture celebrated by these shows was no longer welcome in prime time. For Archie and the entire cast, it was a devastating blow, a professional rejection that felt deeply personal. It seemed to validate the critics' view that their work was somehow less worthy. However, what happened next is one of the great success stories in television history. Refusing to let their show die, the producers took the audacious step of continuing production independently and selling the show directly to local stations through syndication. It was a colossal gamble, and it paid off beyond their wildest dreams. Freed from network interference, Hee Haw thrived. It was picked up by over 200 stations across the country and became more popular than ever. It ran in syndication for another 21 years, long after the network executives who canceled it were gone. This incredible success was a powerful act of defiance. It was a statement that the voices and culture of rural and middle America mattered, regardless of what the critics in New York and Los Angeles thought. For Archie, this vindication was surely sweet, but it did little to change the broader perception. The show was still a guilty pleasure, a cultural phenomenon that was popular despite, not because of, its perceived artistic quality. This placed Archie, its chief creative architect, in a permanent cultural gray area. The mastermind of a show beloved by millions, but respected by few in the cultural elite. He was a king in the world of popular entertainment, but a pariah in the world of serious art. In the summer of 1987, the long run of laughter came to an end. Archie Campbell suffered a massive heart attack at his home in Knoxville on June 14th. It was the beginning of a battle that lasted more than 2 months. He fought his way through the hospital, but kidney complications and his deteriorating health became too much to bear. In the early morning hours of August 29th, at age 72, the comedian's heart stopped beating. His death was not a Hollywood-style national news event, but rather the passing of a family member, a beloved uncle, a beloved grandfather. The news spread through country radio stations and through word of mouth in small towns across America. The response from fans was a wave of heartfelt grief and nostalgia. For millions of people who grew up watching the Hee Haw show, he was more than just a comedian. He was a part of their childhood, a symbol of Saturday nights spent with family. Fans didn't send flowery condolences. They shared personal memories. They weren't mourning a distant star. They were mourning someone who brought simple, genuine joy to their lives. In the country music community, the loss was even more profound. For his Hee Haw and Grand Ole Opry colleagues, it was the loss of a pillar, a father figure. Roy Clark, his close co-star on Archie's Barbershop, mourned the loss of a friend and a mentor. Other artists praised his kindness, professionalism, and ability to make people feel comfortable. They lost a veteran, someone who helped shape the family atmosphere of the Nashville community. They mourned the comedian they loved. Archie Campbell's greatest legacy to the world was laughter. Through the show Hee Haw, he became a symbol of folk joy, an indispensable part of the memories of millions. But that was also the greatest tragedy of his career. The popularity of his humorous, lovable character completely obscured the true artist inside, a musician with profound compositions, and a talented painter who found peace in painting. His resounding success on television inadvertently buried the legacy for which he probably most wanted to be remembered. His greatest tragedy was not that he lacked artistic talent, but that the laughter he gave to others was so resounding that it drowned out the deepest voice of his own soul.